Team USA just won gold again. The Avengers assembled and completed the task of reclaiming USA's spot at the top of international basketball. It is their 7th in the last 8 tries, and it's time we acknowledge USA's basketball dominance at the Olympic level as one of the sport's greatest dynasties. The US have now won 17 of a possible 20 Olympic gold medals, and while this accomplishment may be taken for granted now, many years from now that will not be the case, and I'm going to explain why. Because this will be the last Olympics where the United States winning gold is a foregone conclusion, and the reason for that is because USA basketball has a fundamental problem that could be exposed as soon as the next Olympics in 2028, barring immediate change. Basketball has become a global sport. Starting with the Dream Team in 1992, fans all across the world fell in love with the game, and many adopted it as their own. Over a third of the NBA is now made up of international players, and the best players in today's NBA are all foreign. The last 6 NBA MVP awards have been won by international players. The last American to win it was James Harden back in 2018, and with European stars like Luka Doncic and Victor Wembanyama set up to dominate the 2020s and beyond, it's safe to assume that we're going to see many more foreign players win MVP in the near future. But it's not just the NBA that is growing with international talent. The overall standard of foreign leagues is improving exponentially, as proven by Yabusele, Nando De Colo, Mateusz Lazor, and so many other top EuroLeague players across this tournament. There are only 450 spots available in the NBA, but because of how much the game's grown in such a short time period, there are now more than 450 players capable of playing in the NBA. But there is still such limited spots available. A perfect example of this was the exhibition game in London between Team USA and South Sudan. The original Team USA roster had collectively won 8 MVP awards, 9 Finals MVPs, 10 Olympic gold medals, 14 NBA championships, and 83 All-Star appearances combined. And yet when they faced off against South Sudan, a nation younger than LeBron James, a population which is just a minor fraction of the United States, with 0 NBA players on the entire roster, and it took a LeBron James game winner and a blatant foul that went uncalled, and that game, while an exhibition, highlights one of the biggest problems USA basketball has. Despite having an unfathomable advantage in talent over South Sudan and any other country, these international games are still competitive, and they had to rely on a 40-year-old LeBron James to win. This USA team is heavily reliant on LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry, 3 players who will likely never play for USA again after this tournament. When looking at this roster, you have Joel Embiid, considered a top 5 NBA player, Anthony Edwards, the future of USA basketball, Jason Tatum, arguably the best player on the championship winning team. These are the guys that should be leading Team USA at the Olympics. They are the best players on the best teams in the NBA, making deep runs into the postseason. LeBron, Durant and Curry should really be the vets along for the ride, and the torch should have already been passed, and yet it hasn't. Because the younger American players in the prime of their careers simply aren't as talented as the previous generation, and that becomes problematic. Why? Because Team USA have always solely relied on their talent to win these tournaments. They don't have the chemistry of these other nations, nor the international experience, coaching, fit. The reason these other nations have been able to compete with USA is because what they lack in talent, they make up for with everything else. Throughout basketball history, Team USA have always been able to fall back on their superior talent. They just throw all the best players together on the same team and hope that they figure it out on the job. So far, it has worked, but it won't work forever. And a perfect example of this is the FIBA World Cup in 2023. While we know this was far from Team USA's strongest team, at the time it was still the most expensive basketball team ever assembled, and by far the most talented team in the tournament. You had Jalen Brunson, arguably the best guard in the Eastern Conference, All NBA guys like Anthony Edwards, Tyrese Halliburton. Mikal Bridges is a 3-and-D specialist. Paolo Banchero led the Orlando Magic to their best season in years. Jaren Jackson Jr. was Defensive Player of the Year. Brandon Ingram's an all-star max contract player. Even role players like Austin Reeves and Josh Hart have been important pieces on teams who've made deep playoff runs. Team USA didn't even medal in this tournament, they lost 3 times, and the most revealing loss came against Lithuania. The best Lithuanian basketball player alive right now is Domantas Sabonis. He wasn't even playing. And yet Lithuania, with just one NBA player in Jonas Valanciunas, defeated Team USA in the early rounds of the World Cup. And it's not like the rest of Lithuania's roster was made up of elite players overseas. Most of these guys are playing in the LKL League, which is the Lithuanian basketball league that the Ball brothers played in back in 2018 as teenagers. If that Lithuania team played in the NBA with Jonas Valanciunas as the number 1 option, they would be the worst team in NBA history by far. They would be worse than the Bobcats, Cavaliers and 76ers. While the C Squad USA roster at the World Cup would be by far the best and deepest team in the NBA. They would likely win a championship. This game should not have been competitive. And yet Team USA's response to not winning a medal was because they weren't talented enough. But nobody in this tournament was at full strength. Serbia won silver without Jokic. Canada didn't have Jamal Murray or Andrew Wiggins and won bronze. For nations with considerably less talent than the US, these players should be more important, because Lithuania can't just replace Sabonis. Greece can't just replace Giannis. The fact that Team USA, with the most talented pool of players, are more dependent on their best players than other nations are with less talent is a massive problem and proves something is seriously wrong. But the 2023 World Cup wasn't a one-off. The same thing happened at the 2019 World Cup. USA with Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Donovan Mitchell, Kemba Walker, Chris Middleton was still by far the most talented team in the tournament, and they finished 7th, losing to Serbia and France. Back in 2021, another exhibition game, Team USA vs Nigeria, a nation that less than a decade ago USA beat by 83 points at the 2012 Olympics. In this game, they famously defeated the US with Kevin Durant, Damian Lillard, Bradley Beal and Bam Adebayo. Nigeria only had a handful of NBA players, mostly fringe guys, none of them were even starters. Yet teams keep finding ways to do the impossible against USA, and a common narrative when people try to understand how teams with considerably less talent are able to hold their own and compete with the US, they say that the world has caught up. That statement isn't entirely true. Yes, the best players in today's NBA are foreign, and if you were to make a top 5 list right now, there probably isn't an American player on that list. But if Team Rest of World was to come together and play Team USA, yes, the Team World may have a better starting 5, but they'd be top heavy. USA would have more depth and overall talent. Because these top international players are all from different countries. It's not like they all play for the same team. Luka is Slovenian, Wemby is French, Giannis is from Greece. It's mostly a case of these other nations having one superstar and a team made up of mostly NBA role players and top European guys outside of the NBA. There is not a single international country today that is as deep and talented as the Spain squads between 2008 and 2012. So while the world collectively may have caught up, no other country comes close to the US in terms of individual talent. So the scariest thing for USA basketball isn't that the world has got better, it's that the US have gotten worse. It's almost like in an attempt to cater their league to the international players, they've lost their identity as a basketball nation. What happened to the great American 7-footers? I remember in the 2010s the NBA tried to move on from the center position, historically the most dominant position in the sport. No matter how much the game focuses on perimeter and guard play, basketball will always be a tall man's sport, and more often than not the most important player will be the tallest player on the court. Not only is the MVP award being dominated by international players, it's been won by front court players. And when you look at the best big men in today's NBA, they are almost entirely European. By trying to kill off the center position, the US has missed an entire generation of 7-footers, and the foreigners have come in and filled that void. And the scariest part is, in the majority of these countries that are producing these elite big men, for most of them, basketball isn't even considered a major sport in their country. But the more foreign players dominate the NBA, and these countries are represented within the sport of basketball, the bigger the sport becomes in those countries, and as a result you have more people taking up the sport at a young age. The world hasn't caught up yet, but it will eventually. The continent of Africa is coming. They have some of the most naturally, athletically gifted human specimen on the planet. Once they get access to the same facilities and coaching as the US, they are going to be a problem. So many of these African players were born to play basketball, but didn't start playing until they were teenagers. They're able to pick up the sport so fast, and you have cases like Embiid and Giannis, who despite starting at a later age, became the best players in the world. So what happens when these guys start younger and basketball is instilled in their DNA? Looking ahead to the 2028 Olympics, France may have a golden generation on the cards, with back-to-back #1 picks, an undeniable generational talent, and potentially another #1 pick next year too. The French have been coming for a while now. At the 2021 Olympics, France beat USA in the group stages. They met again in the final and Team USA came back to steal a late win. Remember, this was France before Victor Wembanyama, and yet USA only won thanks to a historic performance from Kevin Durant, who many consider the FIBA GOAT because of this game. How many times over the years are Team USA going to get lucky and bailed out by all-time great players who paper over the cracks and the problems within the system? Kobe Bryant saved them in 2008. Likewise with LeBron James this year included. If it wasn't for all-time FIBA performances for some of the greatest players of all time, USA would have failed to win gold several more times. So what happens when a nation who has always relied on their superior talent to win are no longer as talented? We already know what happens. Exactly what we saw in Athens in 2004 and in the 2019 and 2023 World Cups. Basketball is not a sport that is won on paper. Talent can only get you so far. There are so many other factors that go into the game than just having the best players. USA basketball are already at a disadvantage as these NBA stars don't have FIBA experience. They're not accustomed to the smaller court. The foul baiting strategy that so many stars fall back on doesn't work in FIBA. And every time Team USA have ever lost a major tournament, it's always been because they underestimated the competition and sent an inferior team. And yet they continue to make the same mistake over and over again. After Sabonis beat them in 1988, they assembled the Dream Team and destroyed everybody. In 2004, after losing the Olympics to Argentina, they assembled the Redeem Team. After the 2023 World Cup, they sent the Avengers. And every time they got revenge, it worked. Because they've always had the luxury, the trump card, of assembling a greater team. But what happens when inevitably the strongest USA team doesn't win? USA basketball have not learned their lesson. They don't see the writing on the wall from their previous mistakes. This nation should always win gold. Not just because of the superior talent, but because of their nation's population too. A big problem is the mentality. It starts with load management. Too often the best USA players have skipped tournaments to rest, and they've paid the price for it time and time again. If you want to be at the top of a sport on an international stage, that cannot continue to happen. How many other sports can you not send the best of the best and expect to compete in these world tournaments? As we've seen on countless occasions, the only thing that brings the best Team USA together is ego. Whether it's Noah Lyles' comments last year or not winning the gold, it takes some kind of ego trip in order for the best to come together, and it seems as if every time they come back and win gold again, they forget why they had to come together to win in the first place. And at the 2028 Olympics, without the stars of the past, here is what a potential USA roster could look like. The only guys with real FIBA experience on that team will be Halliburton, Edwards, Brunson, Booker and Tatum. Well, that's if Jason Tatum chooses to play, and I can't imagine he'll be in any hurry to play under Coach Kerr again. And his teammate Jaylen Brown, the finals MVP, I don't think after what's happened with him he'll play for USA again either. So now you're down possibly 2 guys who could possibly be multiple-time NBA champions by then. These guys are supposed to be the next LeBrons, Currys, Durants, the vets with winning experience who've been there and done it at the international level. But if these guys can't take over now when they're supposed to in their primes, how can you depend on them 4 years from now? Guys like Cooper Flagg, Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, they will be FIBA rookies. It will be their first time on the international stage most likely, and they will likely go through a similar adaptation period to every other young NBA star that plays the Olympics or World Cup for the first time. Because history tells us when USA field a team without international experience, they lose no matter how talented those players are. I want to ask you how many players on that 2028 projected roster have the potential to be a top 10, top 15 player of all time? If I'm being 100% honest, I don't see any. And how many USA teams that won gold since the Dream Team can you say didn't have an all-time great player? Those rare generational talents have been the difference over the years between winning and losing. And when looking at this projected roster, we've not taken into consideration load management. What does a weaker version of that 2028 Team USA look like? I don't think they'll have the privilege of not selecting the nation's best players if they want to win gold. But as we know, it will take Team USA losing at full strength in order for USA basketball to seriously change. It will take losing the 2028 Olympics and realizing they can't fall back on the excuse that they didn't have their best players in order for them to adopt a similar system to these other countries that are able to be successful without the talent. Even after the scares at previous tournaments, USA basketball are still taking their success for granted. When defeating World Cup silver medalists, Serbia this time with Jokic by double digits, instead of celebrating a victory against one of the strongest teams in the tournament, all they did was focus on who didn't play. Coach Kerr was receiving backlash for not playing Jason Tatum. Likewise, in their blowout win against South Sudan, he was criticised for not playing Joel Embiid. What kind of environment is that for a coach? In an elimination tournament format, neutral venue, anything can happen. You don't have a multiple game series. You lose once and it's over. And they almost did lose. When the two teams played again, Serbia outplayed the full-strength USA for 35 of a possible 40 minutes in that semi-final. And to prove my point of this whole video, who saved the US? It was the big three. Curry had 36, KD hit the dagger, and LeBron was doing everything on both ends. We can't not mention Joel Embiid either, and the fact that the US are now relying on naturalized players who aren't even from America further proves the point that the great American 7-foot center is basically extinct. In the final game with a gold medal on the line, France had all the momentum. Who was it that closed the deal? It was Steph Curry who put the tie to bed and brought the gold home. And yet the coach isn't just under pressure to win, but he's also under pressure to please everyone, to stroke the egos of the stars instead of focusing solely on the primary objective that is to win by any means. Instead of picking the best players that fit and are successful on the court together, he's got to compromise the team for individuals. That is not a sustainable winning strategy, and while this year they got away with it because they had some of the greatest players ever, looking into the future that will not be the case. So if USA basketball wants to maintain their dominance on an international stage, fundamental change is needed. They won't be able to just throw together a roster of number one options who've never played together and hope they figure it out on the fly. They will need a coach who is solely focused on the national team and not somebody who picks it up as a part-time job in the summer, after spending an entire year focusing on a completely different group of players. They need to choose a squad well in advance, not just choosing the best players, but one that fits together, and like the other international teams, they will need to have practices and play games together in a FIBA-like environment during the season. It will require a huge sacrifice for the top NBA players, perhaps having to depart in the middle of the season for international duty. But if they want to continue winning gold and being the best international country in basketball, they will need to change, because this current model is not sustainable, and I know I will be proven right in the coming years. For now, people of the United States should enjoy and celebrate this gold medal, because one day it will not be as easy as it is right now.